Hello there.
Hello, Ben.
How are you doing, Chezi?
Baruch Hashem. Praise the Lord. I'm doing well. I'm just opening up this on my screen properly. And we have our words with us. Great. Okay, so how was your week?
It's pretty good.
I'm sorry we missed last week.
Yeah, my apologies as well. I can't even remember what happened, but something must have happened.
I think you had like a meeting or like some sort of thing at work that was like pushed
Oh
off.
yeah, that's true.
Was it successful?
Somewhat successful, yeah.
Okay. I'm glad to hear. I'm sorry that I'm chewing something. My wife surprised me by buying me these very rare jelly beans that I like. And sometimes she finds them.
Mike and X? What is that?
No, not Mike and Ike's. It's just some like random Israeli jelly bean, but sometimes they sell it in this bookstore. So when she's there, I'm very fortunate. Beseder. All right. Let's take it away.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure this is where we stop, right?
One more down. Yud Aleph.
Yudalef?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You remember we were talking about how, first of all, we're talking about Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai's students.
Okay, yeah. That's
And then we were hearing sort of their, like we're getting little snippets of each one of them. We're going to continue that right now. And we finished off by saying how we need to be careful from, the scorpion's bite and the fox's bite. And
he said it can start small, like a fox or something. Is like it can be a small bite, but it catches you and then it grows. And infectious and can get all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I remember that.
And we were talking about being careful from the words of the rabbis. They're like flames, and we said like it's like a coal, and there's positive aspects of that and negative aspects of that, and that also correlates with generally the theme over here, which one has to be very careful with his wording and his speech, lest he be misunderstood, and what are the ramifications for those things as well. So all these underlying ideas. Rabbi Yoshua. This is Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania that we were mentioning earlier. Omer, Ayin hara'a v'yetzer hara v'sinat habriot motzi'in et ha'adam min ha'olam. Rabbi Joshua would say, an evil eye and an evil inclination and the hatred of one's fellows drive a person from the world. Okay, so Rabbi Yoshua, the character over here, he is a Levite. He's one of the singing Levites, and when he's younger, the Gemara talks about how he participated in doing some sort of work on the temple doors. So like he really wanted to be involved. He was like very much like in the temple scene. He was like a big deal when he was younger. He was also, or his profession, he was a blacksmith, but he was like a big deal in Yavne, right? Post temple destruction, then they get moved on. He's definitely like a heavy hitter in Rav Yochanan's court, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai in Yavne. So he was like he was a big supporter of Hillel, as far as like Hillel and Shammai and like his attitude.
And we spoke about Yavne is kind of like this Silicon Valley or like the Xerox of
right. Yeah. So he was still, he was bringing up Hillel still there, bringing up some of this like some of this ancient code, and he was also known as wicked smart. 1 second, I want to make sure that I have on the comments, and I could jelly beans. My specialty is getting. Okay, very nice. We're happy you're here, and obviously comment if you have any comments, if you have anything to say. Okay, I'm also just going to add if anyone wants to join, you are more than welcome to. And now and then we will also try to look at the comments and see what's what. Okay, so he was known as like I said, very very smart, and he dealt with he was known for studying astronomy and zoology. He was respected by the emperors at the time, Caesar, the emperors at the time. Um, uh, so he was like a big deal. There's a Gemara that talks about how he says that no one ever bested him in an argument, excluding aside for. I think he said a woman and I think a boy or a girl or children, but he said the only people that have beat him in an argument. He had a lot of arguments. He had drama in the Gemara. He was also recently we gave an example of the famous story of Achnai's oven. He's involved over there as well. He's so clearly he had a lot of opinions, and seemingly he also doesn't think he was ever wrong. So
right,
but of course,
he's a character.
He's a character. We love Rabbi Yeshua. So, having said that, let's dive in. So we say over here, Ayin Hara. So what is Ayin Hara? There's some that see and what we call here the evil eye, and we buy like a little red string on our hand to protect us from the evil eye. So some seeing that as being greedy. It's like a bad sort of outlook of like being like very greedy about things. That could be also like monetarily speaking. There are some that interpret this as having a very, I don't want to say like, seeing the negative in everything, right? Just looking at everything and seeing like the worst version of that. There is seeing everything in a small manner, which also in some way doubles up with seeing the negative, but also seeing how small things could be, or not seeing the potential in things. And this is just like, like a very bad outlook or mindset to have when looking at the world. And it's the Gemara mentions of Ta'aseos nechaka farkeset, make your ear like this into this vessel basically that could carry a lot, and you should be able to hear many different opinions and not look at things like with this very like negative outlook. So the Torah is very much against that sort of small kind of thinking, and obviously against looking at people badly.
Okay, so did you mention like maybe you mentioned that, but yeah, the Ayin Hara also being, or from what I kind of like colloquially in Israel growing up, is like you can put an Ayin Hara on somebody, right? So something like that, so you can like judging them or wishing them something bad, almost.
So we mentioned this once about like we gave that example of the couple. There's a wedding and there's people in the crowd like shooting like negative arrows at them, saying like they're never going to make it, right? So that would be like an example of Ayin Hara.
Yeah,
where like we could say like they're sending like negative attitude. They're looking at it small. They're being pessimistic. They're thinking very small. They're looking thinking negatively. So all that would be true. However, then there's a question of like, okay, is there anything there? Is there actually like can I see like Ayin Hara particles in the air making their way through? So I think, and we need to borrow or delve into like the psychological world for a second, but you could see that, and there's interpretations that Ayin Hara is also the pain you're causing yourself, as in having an obsessive outlook or something. You can imagine someone's constantly staring, constantly looking. Does that mean like his eyes are going to be wider? But from that sort of mindset, you have people that are like having anxiety and rashes and issues because like they can't get something out of their head. So like, can emotional and mental states affect your physical being? And the answer is like, of course. And I mean, there's this. There is. I can't remember who told me the story. Maybe my father did, but that someone hypnotized this person to think that this lighter is boiling hot, and then they put the lighter on the guy's hand, and the guy got a burn, even though like it's not hot. But like the body reacted in that way, which is like it must be hot that my body's actually going to react in that manner.
Yeah.
If it's anecdotal, so the point still stands. So I don't know if this someone could fact check me if that actually went down.
But I mean, the fact that your emotional state can affect your physical state, I think that's kind of like you don't even need to prove that. That's no.
Right. So I was gonna say it's I'm saying in both, it goes both ways. So
Right.
both, it can cause you your own damage, and now where it
Mhm.
gets like a little trickier is like, how am I causing damage to the other person? So now we'll take, let's say, the like a mean girl sort of situation where
Mhm.
she's going to be walking into the party, and she walks in and she's wearing this new dress, and she gets a stare from someone that she cares about, and that person gives her this look of like, it's like hideous or it's disgusting, and all this is happening with their eyes. Or like,
Mhm.
there's ways that you could send a message to someone, or um, uh, uh, and I say this shamefully, but I could stare at my son in a certain way that he knows very quickly how disappointed I am. Right? That could be a damaging stare. Right? And you
Mhm.
could be like, if you abuse that, right? If you look at someone like, and you're making them feel like nothing just by looking at them, there too, you could see like like there's a clear effect from that to happening to someone.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would say the idea of, let's say, the thing you put on your hand, it's more about putting yourself in the mindset of like, I want to feel protected from this, so psychologically I don't have to be thinking about this anymore, and then I could sort of trick myself into being in, like, what do you care what people think about you, right? Like sticks and stones, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's what I remember going through. So there was a JLI, this Chabad course. It was called Supernatural.
Supernatural.
Supernatural. But anyway, there was like this in-person um, set of classes, and they talked about Aina there as well. And they mentioned how there's two kind of two camps in Judaism when you were thinking about Ain Hara and maybe other things as well. I don't know if Lashon Hara, but Ain Hara, let's say just Ain Hara, or the jinxing people, right?
Right.
So one stance is, let's say it has a real effect, and the other one is if you don't pay attention to it, then it won't bother you, something like that. So I think that,
Right, but I would say, so are we saying that about, uh is that a psychological thing or is that a physical thing? Or like,
Mhm.
are the
You let
particles
the
not
particles
you,
attach to you,
right?
or
Or is your mindset is, if you've built yourself psychological safeguards, then even if Becky is looking at you that way, it doesn't affect you. Like, you're not disturbed by that.
yeah, I would say that this would be my opinion that it's secondary. The how is secondary to the fact that should you pay attention to it or not. Like it's kind of like the dream interpretation. Like if you have a dream that tells you to do a mitzvah, is it real or not? Like is it a real prophecy or not? It's secondary to the fact that okay, you should do it. Like why not? Like nobody's gonna tell you not to do the mitzvah but if the dream is about some vera or like something that you shouldn't do, then you should be then there is where you place more judgment over it and maybe you consult more, right? So
That's a good point.
yeah.
Hala. The Yetzer Hara, right? So what is
Mhm.
what is this evil inclination according to this? This is, where is this from, Chabad? What we're reading from right now?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so some see evil inclination as, let's say, the general classic idea of the evil inclination, like it says it over here, which are, those temptation one has to do something quote unquote wrong. Others see this as Yetzer Hara when it's only spoken about Yetzer Hara, not in other contexts. It's talking about Gilu Arayot, so incest. So I'm
Hmm.
saying the temptations of like incest, basically, which is in a sense also like the opposite of love, which is love is very much giving to the other, and incest is like you're really thinking about yourself. It's like it's a very internal, personal sort of relationship that one wants to hold, and that's like a selfish one, and it's not like a loving one. But I personally think about like just even the classic evil inclination, right, which is pretty straightforward, like that kind of mindset, or that those kind of those kind of desires and loss of self-control. Vesinata briot, and hatred,
Mm-hmm.
and the hatred of one's fellow. Right. So this is also sinata briot. Some people see this as, here it says like hating one's fellow, which would be sort of obvious. Some people see this as hating humanity completely, like there's no point of humanity. Some people that see this as splitting it between, there's some people that you love and there's some people that you hate. And that's even worse, because if you have managed to find a place to love other people, like then you must realize then like you could also love these other people that you hate. And then like there's even like more pressure on you sort of to realize that like it's already a problem if like you've created yourself like these separate camps. Other is hatreds for one fellow. The question is like, why is this hatred happening? And generally it's not because he's sitting in his room and just hating, but this is sort of what we see in a, I don't want to say like incel, but someone that feels completely removed from society, not wanted, can't handle the burden that society sort of requires. And then because of his loneliness gets very angry and gets, so like in that interpretation, they're trying to say that it's not like, again, it's not like you're talking about an evil person over here necessarily, right? We're not talking about, you could just be like the Rasha, right? The guy that like is looking badly on people and you know, follows his desires and hates people is clearly a wicked man. So you're saying like, no, it's a good dude that is either dealing with like being jealous and dealing with that kind of mindset, also failing with controlling his impulses. And that kind of person might find himself also secluded and alone, which will lead to them also hating society. And if you're going to be doing all those stuff, right? Drive a person from this world. So you, in theory, it looks like as if like you're gone from this world, you're dead. But it's more, you're talking from society. You're going to end up removing yourself from everyone else. Life becomes too difficult, literally, which you're getting removed. And we could today classify that as, let's say, a clinical depression, where like you are not living the same reality everyone else is living. You are in this horrible, horrible state, which again is why I think they stress the seclusion, because here it says like the result is being pushed out, which is like the one thing you fear, which potentially even leads to that, which is very important for us to realize when we talk about the find a shachen tov and you know, make sure you build like these relationships, make your house a place for people to come. We want to make sure that people are not left on the sidelines.
Right. Different levels of support. And yeah, and it sounded like when you were describing this is cyclical. This is like a feedback loop. It's like you get a germ, or like, right, like this little seed of loneliness, or of like you feel like you're out of you know, at the edges of the party, and then you take yourself outside of the party, and then you take yourself outside of the community of friends, and then you take yourself outside of the world completely, and it's kind of like it just disintegrates in this very vicious cycle. So
yeah, and again, this is while I just supported by some, I'm just talking like loosely right now, to, let's say, to realize that at this time, and you could also see this in the Bible dealing with like a ruach ra, right? Like the bad, the evil spirit that's on Saul, and you get a sense that even at that time, the rabbis were dealing with like, you know, phenomenon in the world where like, you know, you have someone that is psychotic, or you have someone that like people are dealing with depression, and you have to realize like, what is this? What's happening? And putting aside the let's say the theological implications, just creating the operating system of like, you know, these set of rules, this kind of guide for life, it was clearly very needed. And again, like whether you're finding this in Confucius or you're finding it over here, the sense that humanity and people need that kind of frame really to support them. So I'm just pausing and admiring the work of my sages. That's it. Okay, let's move on. Rav Yossi. So this is also this part of the students we were talking about earlier. So this is Rav Yossi, because we've seen a few Rav Yossis. This is Rav Yossi, the priest, the Kohen. Rav Yossi would say, Rav Yossi Omer, Yihi mamon chavercha chaviv alecha keshelcha, ve'atken atzmecha lilmod Torah, she'ina yerusha lecha, v'chol ma'asecha yiyu l'shem shamayim. Rav Yossi would say, the property of your fellow should be as precious as to you as your own. Perfect yourself for the study of Torah, for it is not an inheritance to you, and all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. Okay, so what is Rav Yossi telling us over here? So also Rav Yossi is I think I mentioned this last time, he is a mystic. He deals with the Torah Hasod, and he was a Chassid, which some may interpret as like part of like the Essenes group, which has some relation to the Christians, and they took onto themselves like more stringent rules. Basically, they say about him that like he never gave a piece like mail to a Gentile, not because like he was against Gentiles, just because he would fear that the Gentile might end up delivering that mail on Shabbat, and then he would be like traveling on Shabbat. So he never wanted to take that chance. So you're looking at someone that is living like a very stringent life of like what his expectations are from the rules. Mm-hmm. There's like seclusion involved. So that's our guy. And he's telling us that Yihi mamon chavercha chaviv alecha keshelcha. And we mentioned earlier, Yihi kavod chaverecha kamo shelcha. Like his honor. Here, when you're talking about property, it really needs to be, as a chassid, he's being very specific. He's like, when you're dealing, it's very nice talking about someone's honor and not someone's honor. When we're talking about money, when we're talking about property, when we're talking about real stuff over here, you need to take this extremely, extremely seriously. There's no real room here for wiggle room. You have to see this as your own, and you got to treat it like with the utmost respect when dealing with money. And that's obviously like a very known idea that like any dealings with money or like dealing like giving loans to friends or anything like that is always a very risky move.
And is there any commentary on chaviv specifically, or like why is he using that verb?
Precious to you, I don't know. I'm not remembering any commentary on that specifically. Let me write this down. Chaviv.
Because I feel like it's a word that I don't see too much.
Precious. If Yosef is listening, if there's any commentary on chaviv that you could think of, I mean, you could open up the Svaria version and we could see what the commentary says. But I could dive into that a little. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, I put that inside. We'll continue. So what is the Torah? What is the Mishnah telling us over here? That you have to perfect your study because it's not an inheritance to you. So we have all this conversation about Torah and study, and you must study all your day and your night, and this has to be like the end all be all. However, the Torah, and also specifically, just historically speaking, like given when it was given, this is not necessarily something natural to people, to humanity. While it could be the Jewish people's destiny, that doesn't mean it's natural to them with regards to like, oh, you're just going to wake up in the morning and like without need for any study, will you be able to master this? However, in some ways it's counterintuitive. In some ways, like you have to be, like we're talking about how controlling your desires and like, all these rules on one's life. So this is in some sense very unnatural. So you have to realize that like it's even though this is what you should be doing and you should be perfecting it, it's not something that necessarily is going to be coming natural to you. Even though the Gemara, they say like if there's like 3 generations of Torah scholars, then like at that point it's sort of going to be like hereditary in the family. But even then, this commentary says like you shouldn't depend on that either, because you should always be like we were saying earlier, perfecting, learning more, understanding more, reading in deeper. Just even if you have a sense of you've quote unquote read enough, unlike even though sciences today are quite endless, the idea is that this is like an eternal Torah. So there's never like, oh, I've read till chapter 8 and now I'm done. You always have to learn more, and as you grow, you can understand it more. So there has to be like this constant conversation that you're having with it, and because it's not hereditary, right? Because it's not a genetic thing that's passing by, you have to learn and earn your place in the relationship with the Torah. Even though it's commanded of you and it's a prerequisite, it's still telling you that you're going to have to put your time and effort into building that relationship.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we end it with, and all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. So there are some that read this into like this relates to the other lines, which is like you should perfect your Torah, and you should realize that like, so you're perfecting your Torah and you're studying as hard as you can, but it's difficult for you. And then you realize it's difficult for me because it's not hereditary, like even though my dad managed to do this, like I can't do this. So it wraps it up like, well, don't be too hard on yourself, buddy, because ultimately it's about the intention, right? Like all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. Like you're learn the best you can and perfect the best you can, but we understand that it's not hereditary. And the idea ultimately is like their deeds and the intention and the orientation is proper.
Yeah.
So that is like a very understanding attitude.
Mm-hmm.
There is Hillel saw this as very much his interpretation through this line was that even things like taking care of one's body, right, is like a commandment. It is a mitzvah because we are created in the image of God, and like so there are quote unquote the 613 commandments, and then there's other things that one needs to do. So while Shammai sees taking care of one's body as a requirement, but just as a necessity of being a human, right? Like you must go to the bathroom and you must clean yourself and you must like shave. Hillel would see like, no, looking respectful and making sure you're in physical health is not just because so you could survive to learn Torah, but rather because this is a body you were given that is made of God's image, and because of taking care of that, that's also under the rubric of Chol Maaseh Yadecha Yud L'Shem Shamayim. All your deeds, all your actions, even the mundane, still need to be oriented towards God and towards the good as well. There's a more controversial take that will even read into this, saying that sometimes even the bad deeds you do, the averot you do, are also l'shem shamayim. While we're not telling you to be doing them, rather that even like we spoke about this, like averah sheba b'mitzvah, or find like the good and the evil. So even here you see little hints of this, which like ultimately, God created good and evil, and even in that evil there's good. So in all his creations and in all your deeds, even the evil deeds you're doing, they too should be oriented properly. However controversial that sounds.
Right. Or you can redeem them, right? The classic thing about like you might be like a drug addict and then you become a Baal Tshuva or something, or you just even you recover and then you become a counselor and you help people. You share your experience, and through what you did before, you help other people. So that's kind of like something that I think it's a classic.
Yosef writes, complicated views about Rav Yossi, since they give up their private personal property and are communitarian. Okay, so first of all, no problem. Second of all, the reason I mentioned that is just with people that are in the opinion of that the word chassid, and there's a few other words that are used, were also words used for the Essenes, and the fact that he was a Kohen, and the fact that he dealt with mysticism as well. So those three elements could lead one to maybe move towards that direction, but if that's not, like you said, it's complicated and it's all good if that's not the case too.
Yeah, I would just say, just to add my thought, just to get it out, and I
Sure,
think
sure.
that fits. I think it fits into the first interpretation that you gave about this whole verse about what Yossi says, that it seems to be like there's two parts here, like like the property of your fellow should be precious as your own, and then it's about the Talmud Torah, and that kind of seems to reflect when we talk about Derech Eretz and Limud Torah, like just being a good person or loving your fellow like yourself, and then Limud Torah, and those two things, if you do them, then all your deeds will be for the sake of heaven. So it's kind of like this, putting this formula again. It seems like it's putting that formula again and giving you, this is the outcome that you will have if you do these two things right.
I hear that. You could also see it sandwiched between two things of like derech eretz, which is like, listen, we'll start with like the most crucial thing is like, don't be messing around with people's money. And if you're doing that, like with precious things or people's property, like you gotta be looking at it like derech eretz, like, which is how you want to be behaving as a rational, moral person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Then outside that sandwich, we take off the lid of, let's say, that basic derech eretz, which some will even interpret as, let's say, the Sheva Mitzvah Bnei Noach, right? Like that's like what you could start with. We're going to open up that up and then say, obviously, you should be perfecting the Torah study, because you should realize that just like this other world you just came from that has morality, the Torah that you specifically need to be perfecting is not like an inheritance to you. You got to like earn that. And then we close it up with V'chol Maseh Dachi L'Shem Shamayim. So now that you're doing this perfecting things, you have to realize when you go back out into the bubble, all your actions goes back to like the derech eretz. Now that you've learned that there was the basic morality you had to practice, on top of that, you added your Jewish commandments, and now that allows you to reemerge back into reality, into the eretz, and realizing that kol ma'aseh dechiyul shel shamayim. At that point, realize that your Torah should really be manifested itself through all your actions, whether they're mundane or whether they're like the commandments you have to be doing. Did that make? I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yosef, Chaviv Alecha is rare. It pops up mostly in Pirkei Avot, in the three very similar teachings, right? We mentioned one, Kavod Chavercha. Just a couple of other uses. Chaviv itself isn't so rare, particularly important use in Pirkei Avot. Right. Zeh, we're with you. Our question is like, is there a specific reason it's being used like that? They're using the word Chaviv.
Yeah, it's like almost like I mean, I'm just looking at 3:14 what he mentioned. Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem. It almost seems like it's Chaviv and like Ahava, like almost like a love. There's something personal about it, about that emotion or verb. Which maybe
I hear that. So
it's
Chaviv Adam Shenia B'Tselem, the Chaviv Mamon Chavercha. So I thought I heard my daughter. So we're talking about those elements, and we want to make sure that they're very precious, and the Torah and the Mishnah is stressing that point. Okay, I'm with you. Would ethics of the fathers be competition of the sages in the same camp? Seems that essence were not part of the mainstream community and exchange is particularly so would they be included? Also complicated. It's a question that maybe Yosef could answer you in the comments.
And isn't there? Didn't you mention about? I forgot his name, but or Tzadok, or like the Sadducees, like the originator of. I'm not good with the history, but.
Dealing with like with the Tzdukim and things like that. Yeah, we will discuss that as well.
So he's mentioned here too as the rabbis that his disciples, I think.
Wait, when they were the most kitzonim, he was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They were part of the Sakirim, and he brings them out when they're leaving Jerusalem. He brings them out and he's wounded, and he asks for him to be healed. That was like his brother-in-law, and he was in charge. But it was very dramatic because even though they were on different camps, he's like, that's like really the end of Jerusalem, and like we got to like work together right now at this point. Yosef, exactly 3:14. Chaviv Adam Shnei B'Tselem, right? It's important to unpacking here. It's also the third usage of Chaviv B'Tselem. Okay, we'll get to 3:14. Hemshachnu?
Shachnu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just going to give him one more. Despite multiple attempts at trying to connect them. Nachon. Again, and the evidence that is there is not too strong. Some are a little more interesting. Some have been refuted since. Where were we? Okay. Rabbi Shimon Omer. הווי זהיר בקריאת שמע ובתפילה, וכשאתה מתפלל, אל תעש תפילתך קבע, אלא רחמים ותחנונים לפני המקום, שנאמר, כי חנון ורחום הוא, ערך אפיים ורב חסד, וניחם על הרעה, ואל תהי רשע בפני עצמך. Right? In Sefer Yoel, Rabbi Shimon would say, what would he say? Be meticulous with the reading of the Shema and with the prayer being the silent prayer, the Amidah. When you pray, do not make your prayers routine, but an eternity of mercy and speculation before the Almighty, as it is stated, for he is benevolent and merciful, slow to anger, and abundant in loving and kindness, and relating in the evil decree, Joel 2:13, and do not be wicked in your own eyes. Period. And do not be wicked in your own eyes. Okay, so what are we saying over here? What is Rabbi Shimon telling us? By the way, he also, this whole crew is actually a crew of mystics. He's also a mystic. We don't really know much about him, about this specific Rabbi Shimon. But I'm just thinking back because what we just did was Rav Yossi also. And Rabbi Eliezer also, so it's a mystical crew. Okay, so here is a here b'tfilat Shema. Okay, so tfilat Shema and the Amidah. Well, we'll start with tfilat Shema. We have a tradition of prophecy, and which is. For 2,400 years, roughly, like we haven't been playing that game anymore, but that is in our history, that is in our heritage, so to speak, and we are always attempting to try to reach those levels and go back there. The prophets gifted us with their wisdom. The main prophet gifted us with his wisdom. Moses gave us Shema Yisrael, Hero Israel, right? And that is, that's sort of like a summation of what he's saying. There are some that say that if you say the Shema with kavana, you with proper intention, you are, getting close. You are like it's a small little version of the prophecy of Moses, basically, because this is Moses, summing it all up, basically. And we also have to realize when he's saying this, Shema Yisrael, he's talking to the other. He's not included in that for a moment. He's letting them know Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem Echad. But then he brings him back and says Eloheinu, our God. But we have to realize, Moses, there's the patriarchs beforehand, right? And then Moses comes out of nowhere and gets slapped down in front of the Israelites. They also have to who are you, guy? What are you talking about? He tells them then about Sinai. He's coming from his theological school is really happening with Jethro in Midian, and he has his whole stint in Egypt, right? Yeah. So throughout that journey, Moses is saying okay, the Israelites have this relationship with a God, which is, let's say, the El Shaddai God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that they have in a tradition. In the meantime, Moses is coming and having this relationship with the Egyptians, the Midianim, and realizes in the sneh when he meets God in the burning bush that oh wow, I'm getting this whole new level right now of interpretation and understanding. And then he lets the Israelites know, guess what? Your God and my God, of my understanding, that also revealed himself to you, it's all the same. It's all one. Right? So that is like a tremendous truth and understanding that we get. So the Torah is now saying, like, this is something that you must be part of and must have a proper intention of. However, this is really only coming from top down, right? This is more of like a declaration recognizing God and his authority coming from above down to us, so to speak, above. So now we jump to we have Shema and Tefillah. The Tefillah is the gift that Ezra and the last prophets give to us, right? They are sensing what's happening. They know the winds have changed. They're being very prophetic about it. And they say, like, we are going to still give you these prayers. So this is now the bottom up connection, where like once we recognize the Shema, we could also then, if we're in that place and we did so properly and we brought ourselves to that recognition in that small little window of like what Moses maybe was feeling, in that mindset, then we could take the words of the last prophets and then reorient that back up to God. So if, putting all the other prayers aside, there's a very big focus of how you need to be careful. And by being careful, it's not like be careful to pray it, which is a prerequisite. It's be extremely careful about the intention and the mindset you have when saying these prayers, which you obviously need to say multiple times a day, like all the other requirements you have, like the legal requirements you have. This is really talking about like the mindset one has to be in.
So first of all, what?
I said that was a lot, so you're welcome to.
So no, that was good. I appreciate the how you connected. You kind of gave a kind of like a historical view of Moses and connecting Moses' perspective and the Israelite perspective. I haven't heard that put in that way before, and so it was nicely done. I appreciate that. It was cool to see that connecting. And then I don't have much to say in terms of like that makes sense in terms of the Shema and then the Amidah. It's kind of this pattern of like before, which is obviously used in the Amidah, especially of like going before a king or any other authority where you bow down, you say, "Oh, you're great. I know you're great. You've done a lot. I love you." All that for the king, let's say, right? And then you say, "I have this one thing that I want to ask for." Or I have this 19 things that I want to ask for. And then but first you kind of acknowledge, and you do that the same probably with your wife or anybody else. When you acknowledge, you say thanks, and then you kind of go into this other mode. But that's the only thing I had. But I guess
that starts with Shem Havaya, right? The Tetragrammaton, God. Open up my lips, right? So like already there's a sense of submission, which is like you are the one that breathes through me and gives me even the mouth, allow me the privilege to pray to you. Even if even if that includes me requesting things from you, it's still all happening under the rubric of like, I'm starting with this thing, like, can I even speak or allow me to speak?
Right. And that just happens kind of like in a fractal. It happens within the Amidah, and it happens within the Amidah and the Shema, and it happens like throughout the liturgy, because the first thing that you say in the morning is, I am grateful, and then everything else.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Right. We said the Modani is automatically putting you in that place of know who you're standing in front of and putting your, orient yourself immediately from when you wake up in the morning. Mm-hmm. I see. Yosef was found by Luke. I'm glad we're having people meet together on our Pirkei Avot shir. This is where it all happens. It's like the new watering, the new watering hole. Yeah. Okay. And when you pray, do not make your prayers routine, right? You want to have mercy and supplication before the Almighty. I was also just going to actually mention one more thing about Havei Zahir, which you don't really have in English, as I'm looking at this, be meticulous. And we mentioned this in other places as well, which is there's always this play on Zahir, which is Zohar, as in be radiant, right? So like learning the Torah properly, or going back to the Moses connection, realizing that this is like the Shema and the Shemona Esrei and the Amidah prayer are the last remnants of prophecy. If you do so, your face will glow and you will shine, and you will allow you to elevate yourself as well.
Right.
So following that, so what does that mean that it shouldn't be routine? Because of course it's a routine, it's built in, it's 3 times a day, and like these are the prayers. So it's saying, yes, obviously there is a system you're in that has the routine of prayer, but because of that, you need to make sure that it's not a routine itself. So there's different ways how the Talmud interprets this. It's you don't want it to feel like it's a burden. You don't want to feel like it's a burden that you have on top of you. You have to feel like you're really free. So even though your alarm goes off and you have to realize that you need to go now to pray, right? Or let's say we'll have, I don't know, I was just in the design center today with a client, and at 1:00, all the religious, many of the religious Jews in all the different stores in the design center, they ascend onto this little lighting store, and in the lighting store, there is a prayer service time. So they all go over there. Now, that would be, it's still being the routine. Once they enter the door, the question is, can you then let loose? Can you then allow yourself to experience this as not as routine anymore, but as like the experience of that I'm trying to be connecting to God and orient myself properly. So we're saying that you have to put that in your mindset, even though it's a routine structure, the mindset can't be a routine. We also mentioned El Rachamim v'Tachanunim, right? There needs to be over here, like you're asking, like for mercy over here. And this is also part of the way that it's not going to become routine. It's not just saying the words and then walking back out. It's feeling it. So as a child, I had a very hard time seeing people like really like shuckle and cry. And I'm like, are you really crying? Like immediately you're just like bawling. And now I would say this is where it comes in a concept that we discussed called mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, right? Like, fake it till you make it, sort of. Mm-hmm. And there's a sense of like, I need to put myself in this mindset for that to happen, right? So I get that. I appreciate that now more. Exactly. Fake it till you make it. So I appreciate that more as I'm older right now. Obviously, it's risky. And what is it that you're doing that with? Like, is that with all different elements in Judaism, or are you just doing that with regards to crying? But asking for mercy, in theory, should be a mindset where you are already feeling like you need to be. You can't just be running the motions when you're in a mercy mode, right? When you feel like you're like when you need mercy from God, that's less of just like, I'm going to say these 5 words. It's more, I'm going to have like more intentionality. So you need to have that feeling and show more emotion as well. Yeah. Some say not having it be routine means that in the prayer itself, that there's no new element, there's no new request, there's no new conversation, there's no new engagement with God, which is just like, which is difficult because you have these specific prayers that you're supposed to say. But the idea is that, let's say in one of the prayers is that all the sick people of Israel, they should heal anyone sick, and God heals all sick people. Okay, so you can be like, listen, it's general enough that it like really covered everything. But the idea would then be, can you stop and think like, I can't believe my dad's not feeling well. Like, life is so fragile, and God is so amazing for giving us a life and taking and and still challenge him with this disease he's dealing with. And please give me the power to be able to assist him emotionally. Please make sure like the medicine in the world that we could really get, advance and make sure that all this like politicalization is getting out of it, so we could really advance in this field. So sick. Now you'd be like, you can't be doing that forever because you're going to be praying forever. But can you sometimes bring in a new element? Can you sometimes have another level of engagement with your prayer and that is making sure that it's not routine. And I mean, ironically, also people say like, don't make it a routine, which means that's why we only do 3 and you don't have so many more. Because like 3 is enough, and God doesn't require so many prayers from you. Just make sure it's like 3 times a day. Obviously, others pray 5 times a day, and I don't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously, three prayers a day also has to do with the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and with the sacrifices that were given in the temple. But yeah, okay. So that has to do with the routine. Let's continue. We have this quote that we have from Joel over here about that God is benevolent and merciful, slow to anger, and that's how we know that we need to come. Our mindset needs to be that we're asking for mercy because we know God is merciful and He's slow to anger. So that sort of needs to be our mindset. Also, it's interesting to note over here that it's a different sequence than Moses' famous Rachum v'Chanun. Here it's Chanun v'Rachum, and here again you could see a hint to the top down, bottom up. When God is speaking to us, He could come and say that I am merciful and I'm slow to anger. However, when we are praying to Him, it's not for us to assume Him merciful. First, we are being thankful that He's slow to anger, so we could even start the conversation. Then we're like, and you're merciful. But first, like, thank God you're allowing this space to even be happening. And that only happens because you're slow to anger and you tolerate this. And you tolerate this sort of behavior that we have. So again, that's like putting us into that mindset. Ve'al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmecha, and do not be wicked in your own eyes. So here too, there's different interpretations, which is don't be wicked unto yourself, which means don't be praying alone. Don't be like secluded from the community, and because if you're alone, you're going to end up either putting yourself in a situation where no one else is watching you, and then you feel comfortable to do evil things. Being alone, like we said earlier, is going to put you in a place where you're depressed, and then you're going to do evil things because like no one else is with you, not because you wanted to be away from other people. There is an interpretation which is, don't assume that if you do an evil thing, it only ends with you. Rather, you are part of a whole, and even if you think you're by yourself, your evil actions have a butterfly effect, have a ripple effect to the people around you. However, many look at this as don't be so hard on yourself, right? We just have this place of, and this goes back to, now let's read this in context, which is, listen, you got to be super, super careful about your intention, right? This is your chance for prophecy. And when you're doing this prayer, you make sure it's not a routine, and you got to be innovating, and it got to be connected. And God is merciful, and you have to understand, you have to know your place. You're like, that's a lot to carry on. And then you can be praying, and you're like, you know what? God is merciful. I'm not being careful enough. I'm a jerk. I'm evil. I'm bad. I'm not worth it. And Mishnah comes and says, slow your roll, buddy. From the things we've said in the past, we're like, who are you to doubt yourself and your God's creation? And like, don't put yourself in that position where like, like you're doubting like, God's plan. But secondly, that like, don't, you have to realize that ultimately there's good inside you, and that connection is always there. So like, even if it's not working out well, and because you're in this intense mindset where you need to be humbling yourself and recognizing how great God is, you might find yourself second guessing your own creation. Like, relax. You're not an evil dude.
Yeah.
All's good.
And I feel like this is kind of like the same, but maybe slightly different, of when you view yourself as evil, you might cut yourself some slack in a bad way of like, okay, so I'm already doing this thing. I'm already procrastinating on, or I'm already doing this bad thing. So what does it matter? Like I'm already on the other side of the spectrum. So let me just continue doing those bad things, or let me just kind of keep doing the things that I'm doing, and it doesn't matter. Maybe after that, I'll move into this other thought. So you kind of like tie into this identity and keep it. It's also bad.
Like we mentioned earlier, like you said, like you're gonna think you're evil, you're gonna fall into this place where like then evil is gonna be like, evil acts are gonna be second nature to you. You're gonna give yourself more. What we mentioned on the previous Mishnah, which is Koma Sechel Hashem Shamayim, right? That all your deeds are for heaven's sake. And I mentioned that there's a controversial take that means like even the bad deeds you do are for heaven's sake. That would be like how you would sort of not find yourself in this place, even if you're doing an evil thing, because can you find yourself during an evil act still recognizing proper orientation and not judging yourself as like, I'm evil now because of this? Rather, I did an evil act, but I still want to work on being proper, right, and trying to recognize the good thing in the evil act I did, so to speak. So yes, definitely try not to judge yourself too hard. And I mean, it's sort of easy for the rabbis to say this at the end after they just gave us like all of Perek Rishon and Perek Sheni about like learn, love, be oriented, be connected, right? So there's always this balance.
Yeah, and so don't be hard on yourself and don't attach yourself to that kind of identity, because then it's going to play this dynamic thing on you where it's top down, and it's not only bottom up, it's like top down. Like I'm evil, so and then it's just going to kind of like we talk about, like it's going to emanate things on you. It's going to prescribe things for you.
Right. Which is also goes back with like that evil eye, right? Like you're having that evil eye towards yourself, right? This is all in that same vein. Let's scroll down.
Yep. Let me find it. Here we go. Oh. Okay.
Rabbi Elazar Omer, Have shekud lilmod Torah ודע מה שתשיב לאפיקורוס ודע לפני מי אתה עמל ומי הוא בעל מלאכתך שישלם לך שכר פעולתך. Rabbi Elazar would say, be diligent in the study of Torah. Know what to answer a heretic, and know before whom you toil, and who is your employer, who will repay you the reward of your labors. Okay? Dal ma la'ashiv la'apikoros, right? Know what to answer heretic is like a very famous line that people say. So first off, as we do, who is Elazar ben Arach? We mentioned him also as one of the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, also a mystic, so much so that it's said that he was explaining the story of Ezekiel, the concepts of Ezekiel's chariot to his teacher, to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he was flabbergasted by his explanations as well. He's so clearly brilliant. He was also Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, even though we were talking about Rav Yoshua earlier, that was a heavy hitter. He was like the prize student of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, was Rav Elazar ben Arach. So he tells us, never stop learning, basically. And again, like we said earlier, like this is an endless pursuit. This is eternal. This requires you, like if earlier we said perfect, right, which has like some sort of like there's sort of like a goal. Here it's be diligent, right? There's no like just keep on this endless study and be diligent in it. And we say like a doctor, obviously doctors still have to learn how the medicine is advanced, but this would be more of like you can't like rest on your laurels. You constantly have to be in motion with the study of Torah. Know what to answer the heretic. Why did I get along so well? No, you're not a heretic, brother. You and me will be standing side by side in the temple.
I think he meant that you're the heretic.
That's good. I mean, Jacob would agree with that, right? I'm the heretic. Okay. It's actually interesting that Rav Elazar himself is saying this. It's ironic because even though he was so brilliant, it's said that him and his wife, they go to this like hammam. They go to like these natural springs there was like a name for them, like in Greek, like Imamus, I think it was like where they had these natural springs, and where there's like these healing springs, and he goes there. Him and his wife go there, and the story goes that he just basically like fully gets like he buys into this lifestyle, and he's like, I just need like healings and doing things like for like taking care of my body, and he completely forgets all his Torah. And the rabbis and his students are praying for him so that he will remember, and eventually they manage to get him out and bring him back. But this is sort of like the poster boy of recognize that even like it's not hereditary, and you constantly have to toil in this as well, because ultimately, even if you're like the greatest, if you step away for too long, it will become you'll lose it. Some people say that lishkod means that you should know it well, as in that if you don't know it well and you only know it partially, you will get very confused, and that connects to the next line, which is know how to answer a heretic. So this is a requirement that is also under the rubric of learning Torah, right? So in the process and the requirement of learning Torah, you also must know how to answer the heretic, which means, and let's say according to Maimonides, this means like you must study, like we just said, Rabbi Yehoshua studied astronomy, studied zoology, because I need to understand my heretic brother. I need to understand where they're coming from, their mindset, the world they're living in. And this goes back to the derech eretz, right? Which is be careful with someone's money, right? Which is like a tangible, physical thing that we all have to play with. Get into that learning mode, come out recognizing that like how God is relevant in all these things. And that's also how you're going to be able to answer the heretic himself. And that goes back to like the serious study. If you don't study well, or you only half-ass studied, you could find yourself caught in an embarrassing situation where either you find yourself bamboozled, or just you end up desecrating God's name by the embarrassing job you're doing representing God. And at this little point, I would say, even though we didn't push any Zionism, Jacob does a fantastic job at this, where he is engaging deep into Christianity. So he could sometimes, you could argue about the fashion of how he decides to use his words, but he is taking many of those elements seriously, right? Like to say, even though it's controversial, and I'm not saying the rabbis are saying this over here, but know how to answer a heretic would say, yeah, I've been to a church and I've prayed in your pews, and I know now what that means, X, Y, Z, and how to answer that. So Jacob is traveling around, meeting people, doing these things, which is, he is building himself these his greatest hits, but what he calls his answers towards the heretic. Now, you could say he's sort of seeking to not know what to answer the heretic. He's maybe demanding, hear what I'm going to tell the heretic. But I think that he would be a good example of someone that is, and what's interesting is that qualifies as the study of Torah, as someone that he himself worries, like, what will the rabbi say about me? I think that there's much to say in his favor, and I definitely see that as a great use of learning the Torah, which is what he's doing, which also politically is a problem for, let's say, the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, because people that want to stay away from studying, let's say, math, English, sciences, or maybe studying that at a basic level, but then not engaging with the world philosophies, it's not only are you leaving yourself exposed, you're not allowing yourself to do like what we're saying over here. Knowing what to answer the heretic is sort of the original steel man, right? Like we said, Hillel used to steel man. Like that's part of that. That's part of like really making sure that you are fully immersed in this conversation.
Yeah, and probably not only, and probably for many reasons, right? For yourself, so that you yourself can be a assured of your perspective, of your convictions, maybe for the heretic themselves, and also for other people. So if you have students that are coming to you with questions, or you have friends that are coming to you with questions, and they're telling you, listen, this particular perspective, I've heard what they said, and it seems makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't jive with what I learned about the Torah, right? I mean, this is the whole Moreh Nevuchim idea. Is like, what do I do with this? So this is kind of what the Rambam does with the guide for the perplexed. Is like, you need to. It's not only for yourself so that you're assured or that you know the propositions. It's also because it's for people around you.
For sure. I mean, that's a great example of like the guide to the perplexed, right? I mean, the guide, and because we're eternally perplexed, we're eternally in this doubtful space, and part of that doubtful space is recognizing, and this goes all the way back to what we were saying about Moses, is we only see the world through Elohim, through nature, through God, and not that, like Spinoza thought it, that like nature is God, but God is also nature. God is many other things, and part of it is also nature, basically. We are looking at the world through, the Rabbinic and the agentic sort of conversation that we had, or that Paul has, but that is why you need to know what to answer the heretic, because you're living in the heretic's world. That's the world you're engaging in. And that also goes back to why for Hillel, it's important to even, cutting one's nails or taking care of oneself is also happening through the agentic and not the Arenic, because like you could get lost in the Arenic understanding of those relationships. Our next line over here was, and know before whom you toil and who is your employer, who will repay your reward for your labor. So this is, you could look at this as just like your actual employer, but clearly this is talking about God, right? So before who we spoke earlier about da lifnei mi ata omed, know before who you stand. So this is know before who you toil, because this, going back to the be diligent in study of Torah, and then you could ask yourself like, okay, and now I also have to study the sciences and I have to study all this stuff. Like what? Like why am I doing all this? It's a reminder, like if you feel for a second that I've been toiling and there's no reward, the reward should be you're doing this for God. And you have to remind yourself, if you were confused for a second, like remind yourself that this is for the master of the universe. And that's why we toil gladly. And who is your employer and who will repay your reward of your labors? And here it mentions over here, so, and God being the ultimate employer, right? Employing you in this world and part of this world that you're toiling, that toil, the work he expects from you is the study of Torah, including knowing what to answer the heretic. And if you are studying to know what to answer the heretic, you clearly know about world philosophies and morality and things around you, which means you're going to be a good individual. Like all those things sort of play off of each other. And who will repay a reward of your labors? And that labor, that toil that you're doing, remind yourself that whether it's in this world or in the world to come, God will ultimately reward your good deeds and your labor. I think on that note, we'll continue with Rabbi Tarfon next week.
Sounds good.
We could continue the stream if people want. Actually, I hear my daughter crying, so we cannot continue the stream. Peace be upon you all.
Thank you very much.
Get you on the flip. Luke, Dan, and Yosef, if you're still there, thank you so much for your comments, as always. See you guys later.
Bye.